Hi guys, so now that we've looked at supply and demand, and we've just kind of drawn them as basic supply and demand graphs, it's time to look at, well, how do we know how steep the graph is? So that's something that we call the elasticity. And the first one we're going to actually look at is the price elasticity of demand, which we're just going to call PED for now. And the price elasticity of demand actually tells you how responsive a change in quantity is following a change in price. And there's a formula for this. So we can say PED is equal to the percentage change in quantity demanded over the percentage change in price. And this will give you very different types of demand curves. So, for example, it will tell you the difference between a demand curve that is very steep or a demand curve that is flatter. And it will let you know, why it's like that and then what that will really impact. So we can say that, something that is flatter is more elastic and something that's steeper is more inelastic. So you get various different versions of PED. So you can say that if the PED is less than 1, or it's a fraction or a decimal, it is inelastic. And that means it is steeper. If the PED is greater than 1, or it's, shallower, it is elastic. If the PED is equal to 0, it is perfectly inelastic. If the PED equals infinity, it is perfectly elastic. And if the PED equals -1, it is called unitary elastic. Well, if we were to look at these, you can get various demand curves. So something like this would be perfectly inelastic. So that means no matter what the price change is, the quantity is always the same. So whether we were to keep increasing the price, the quantity would always be the same. And if we were to have the opposite, this would be perfectly elastic. So the quantity would change depending on, the price would be the same, but the quantity would constantly change. And there are a few factors that affect PED. The first one being the availability of substitutes. So If there are more substitutes available, it'll be more elastic, because if the price of a box of tissues goes up, you just buy a different brand of a box of tissues, or you buy a different box of tissues. So the quantity would go down if the price were to change. You can have the degree of necessity. The more necessary it is, the more inelastic it would be, because you need it. Even if the price changes, you're still going to buy it. The proportion of income spent on the product. So for example, if there's a large proportion of income spent on a product, it would be more elastic, because if the price was to change, you'd have far less disposable income. So then you'd have to find a cheaper alternative. And the last one is time. Now, over time, everything will become more elastic. In the short run, you might think, okay, I have to buy that product, I'll buy it. But in the long run, you'll find other alternatives and it will become more elastic, because you will find a cheaper alternative and so on. The reason that PED is interesting is because you can look at the PED and revenue. So we already know that the revenue is the price times the quantity. So as a company, if we were to look at changing our price, and I'm just going to give two very basic examples. So if we have the price and the quantities, if we have a very inelastic product and a very elastic product, if the price was very high, we'd have this quantity of goods sold. So this would be our revenue. Whereas if we were to decrease the price, we'd only increase sales a little bit, which would mean that we would have the purple revenue. So if your product is inelastic, a higher price would lead to a higher revenue. Whereas if you had a price elastic product and you were to decrease the price, your revenue would be much greater. So a lower price would lead to a higher revenue. Companies can use this to see how best to, price their product and so on as well. The same way that we had the price elasticity of demand, we can also have the price elasticity of supply. We can call this the PES. And it's the same definition, but it's how responsive a change in quantity supplied is following a change in price. And again, we have a formula. So PES is equal to the percentage change in quantity supplied over the percentage change in price. And this again tells you how steep the supply curve is. So, for example, if we had a very steep supply curve, this would be inelastic And if we had a very shallow supply curve, this would be more elastic. Now, it has the same kind of numbers as the PED. So if your PES is less than 1, it is inelastic. If your PES is greater than 1, it's elastic. If your PES is equal to 0, it is perfectly inelastic. If your PES is equal to 1, it is said to be unitary elastic. And if your PES equals infinity, it is said to be perfectly elastic. So with the PES, again, you want to think about the factors that affect your PES and what makes it elastic or inelastic and so on. So you have the factors of production. If you remember the factors of production, your 4 factors of production being land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship. So the ideas. If you have access to these factors of production, or do you not? So if you can access the factors of production more easily, it'll be more elastic. You have the availability of stock. So if you can have lots of stock, then it'll be more elastic, whereas if it's very difficult or expensive to hold stock, it'll be more inelastic. Do you have any spare capacity? So the more spare capacity you have, the more elastic it would be. So if you have a machine that can produce 1,000 calculators, but you're only producing 10, you'll be more elastic because you can very easily produce more. Whereas if you're producing 999 calculators, you'll be more inelastic. And lastly, time. Like we said, the longer time goes on, your elasticity will become more elastic. And the next one would be income. Elasticity of demand. Now I'm going to call this YED. Y for income, people tend to, say that I is inflation or interest rates, or you can become quite confusing, so I've always heard YED. The definition is the same. How responsive a change in quantity demanded is following a change in income. Now, again, you have a formula. So YED is equal to your percentage change in quantity demanded over your percentage change in income. And people use this to kind of interpret various values. So if your product is a necessity. Necessities are products that we need, everyday value. So water and toothpaste and shower gel and food and things like that. Those are basic goods. Those are necessities. Those tend to be inelastic or income inelastic, because no matter what the price is, you need them. Petrol and things like that as well. You can have luxuries. So a new designer handbag, or designer watch, or things like that. Those tend to be they're very optional. So with these, they tend to be elastic, because if the price of something, or if your income goes up a little bit, you will change them and tend to buy them. So it can be argued that they can be elastic for imported goods, or they can be inelastic as well in certain cases. You can have normal goods. Now, this means if your income goes up, the quantity you buy goes up. So these will be positive. And you can also have inferior goods. So that means if your income goes up, you'll buy less of them. So these will be negative. So things like potatoes, for example. If your income goes up, you buy less potatoes so that you can buy meat or things that have more nutrition. Whereas if your income goes down, you stop buying the luxury, caviar and meat and things like nutrition to just get a dense meal, so you buy more potatoes. Income elasticity and price elasticity and so on are very, very useful for companies. So a lot of companies are interested in income elasticity because they know that changes to the global economy and people's income levels will affect their industry. So, for example, LVMH, one of the largest luxury conglomerates out there, they would use information like this to understand how should we, what's going to happen to our products. Are people's income levels going up? Are they going down? What will that do for our products and our demand? But then also they can combine that with the price elasticity of demand and say, well, how can we then price our products? Do we have, inferior goods? Do we not have inferior goods? Do we have luxury goods? Do we not have luxury goods? And so on. It's also important for the government because they know that they can start looking at taxes and subsidies. So you can have price elasticity and the government. So they can look at firstly taxes. So what kind of goods should they tax? Where will they get money? And subsidies. So if the government was to tax something inelastic like petrol or addictive goods, cigarettes and alcohol and things like that, they'd be able to get a lot of tax revenue because even though the price has increased, people are still willing to buy them, which means that they can get a large proportion of money from that as tax revenue. And there you have it. You have the three elasticities. So income elasticity of demand, you have price elasticity of supply, and price elasticity of demand as well. So those are the three elasticities that you're meant to know. What to include, the factors, how to interpret them, what do they tell you as well, and why they're useful. Stay tuned for more.